I had one children's books. I had one children's book. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey, and we're about to get very, very nerdy with all of the books that I read in May. In May, I read 16 books. So, it's way more than I anticipated. I participated in the Believathon, so a lot of these are going to be middle grade, and I will leave the vlogs that I talked about, that I vlogged those 2 weeks, down below, because I talk, I think, more in depth on those books. And then like the last week, I was doing a lot of stuff that I didn't need in my hands, so I got through a lot of audiobooks at the end. So I listened and read 16 things, and let's just go into the stats. So of those 16, I read 5,012 pages. Now that does not include one thing because it's an Audible original audiobook, which I will talk about at the end, but it didn't really have any pages, so that doesn't go into that. And of those 5,000 pages, I had 11 audiobooks and 5 physical books. So my age category for these books is very telling of the month. I read 1 children's books, 10 middle grade, 1 young adult, 1 new adult, and 3 adult books. So I had a month. Genres were all over the place, so I had 8 fantasy, 3 nonfiction, 2 historical fiction, 1 contemporary, 1 classic, and 1 sci-fi. And as far as ratings go, it's also telling because of the month that I had. So I had 3 5 stars, 9 4 stars, 3 3 stars, and 1 2 star. So let's just get in, because we have a lot to talk about today. The very first book that I ended up reading in May was the first in the Infernal Devices, which is Clockwork Angel by Cassandra Clare. This is a book that is part of the Shadowhunter world. I've never read a Cassandra Clare book, but Cassandra Clare is my best friend Lauren's favorite author. So I thought I'd give this trilogy a try because it is set in Victorian England. So I do have a book diary on this. It's not out yet because I'm waiting to finish the entire series and put them all together. So that's probably going to come out next month sometime. So I won't go into too many details, but I did give this one 5 stars because it was so much fun. I adored this book, and I cannot wait to get involved in the second book because I'm reading the second book in the series for June. And I'm there for it. So this is fantastic. I really enjoyed a lot of this world. It really did feel like Victorian England and magic. Like, it felt like magic could exist in this world and in Victorian England, and I just loved that. We split this book up so that we would read the first half in this many days, and then the second half in this many days, and then we would like talk halfway through. And so I finished the first half earlier than we talked, and I didn't want to start the second half until after we talked because I didn't want to like remember something from the second half. And all I wanted to do was pick the book up because I needed to know what was going to happen. So I finished this book like super late at night, early in the morning, one of those, because you know how like you're in the end of the book and there's like that big climax, whether it's a fight scene, whether it's just like a lot of stuff happens, and you know that if you get into this last section, you're going to need to finish it because you can't stop. And I realized I was in that section before I realized I was in that section. So I just stayed up and read it. And it was great. I liked it a lot. The next book I read was The Tombs of Atawan by Ursula K Le Guin. This is the second in the Earthsea Cycle series. I gave this 4 stars. I loved this one. I'm reading this as part of the Le Guin Along, which is hosted by Ashley from A Frolic Through Fiction. And I read the first one for April, and it was okay. Like, it wasn't great. I think I gave it 2.5 stars, but it was fine. And I wanted to see what people thought of that before I decided to continue, and a lot of people said that this one was the best in the series, and I was like, perfect. I agree. This is the best one, and I think it's because I like the main character. We follow a female main character, and while the main character of the first book, Ged, the like magician, is in this book, he is a main character in this book, he's not the main character. It's all about her and her time in like this world's religion and temple kind of, and he is going on a quest in this temple, and just the two of them kind of like learning about each other and learning about what's real in the world and what's not. I think it was fantastic. I loved her a lot. I loved learning about her. I was hooked right away. And I will say that I did listen to this on audiobook, and it was by Rob Inglis, who is the guy that does The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. That I loved The Hobbit when he did it. So he might have helped out a little bit, but I still think that her story is just awesome, and I just really liked her. I don't know what it is about her. I can't really articulate this very well, but I don't know what it was about her that I liked, but I liked her. She made the story fantastic. Also, you're learning about the tombs and like her kind of like, because she's a priestess in a sense, and you're learning about like what she's the priestess of and while she's learning, and I found that fascinating as well. Alright, I'm gonna need you to calm down. I also think, one of the things that I think I liked about this one was that the plot was also better. You are learning a lot, and the first one had a lot of problems of like, it would speed through the things that you really wanted to know about, and then it would take the time to drag on the stuff that you didn't care about. I liked the plot. I think the way she wrote this was better. So, I liked this one a lot. The next book that I ended up reading was the one that I picked from my TBR fiction jar, and that is The Fortune Hunter by Daisy Goodwin. This is fantastic. It follows the Empress of Austria, known as Cece. This follows like real characters, and a kind of like horseman captain. He's like a captain in the military, and this heiress named Charlotte, and it's like a love triangle because both of the girls love this guy, and it's very angsty, but I did end up giving this one 4 stars. You can't understand the thing that I just said. I did end up giving this one 4 stars. I am a big fan of Daisy Goodwin's work. I have one more by her, The American Heiress, which I read a few years ago and really enjoyed. And so I'm glad I read this one. This one is 100% centered around a love triangle. I really liked it. It is younger, so it does feel a little bit younger than like an adult book, but there are things that happen. It was great. I enjoyed it a lot. I wasn't quite sure. I was thinking very meh about it at first, but then I got really invested really quickly and realized that I cared about these people. So that was great. Also, the audiobook that I listened to this in had a little section at the end where our narrator talked to the author, Daisy, about like the decisions that she had made and kind of how they stemmed a little bit from history and how she took the actual history and changed it a little bit. Because of the little thing at the end of the audiobook with the author, she's fascinated by Cece and Cece as a character, which I thought was really interesting considering that this book didn't feel like it was from Cece's perspective. It felt like it was from the heiress's perspective. And like, I'm just curious, like, why that decision? If you were so interested in Cece as a person, why not make the entire book from her perspective? But she didn't. She did third person, and she did it in a way that Cece was just a main character, but wasn't the main character. Or at least that's how it felt to me. So I thought that was rather interesting, and I'm curious why she did that, or if that's just me reading into it. Charlotte is actually really into photography, which I thought was fascinating because Daisy had to go out and learn about how people actually took photos at this time and how, because she's an heiress, she can do this. It was fun. It's been a while since I read this one, so I'm forgetting a lot of what I initially thought, but I did enjoy it. It was fun. I really like this author a lot. The next book is the start of my middle grade because this was the first book that I read for Believathon, and that is Arusha and the End of Time by Roshani Chokshi. I read this one for Poachers Pocket and was just read the first book in the series. This one I ended up giving 4 stars to. I listened to this on audiobook and I loved it. It was so much fun, and I don't think I would have enjoyed it as much if I had just read it. I think it's a super clever story, and I think that the author is incredibly, incredibly imaginative when it comes to modernizing this story and putting all of the fantastical elements in like a modern day setting. For example, like a big thing that they talk about in this book is a like bazaar where you can go and purchase a bunch of like magical things, and it's set in a Costco. What? But it makes perfect sense, and it's such a fantastical adventure story, and I freaking loved it. But I think that I enjoyed it so much because the audiobook narrator was fantastic, and I really enjoyed it, and I am listening to the second one on audiobook as well because she did such a great job that I don't want to just read it. I want to like listen to it as I read it. I loved it. This is good. If you want a fun, fantastical adventure, it does have Indian mythology in it, so if you're interested in that as well, I thought it was fantastic. I clearly don't have enough words to describe it because it was so cool. It was just fun. It was just a fun story. I also really enjoyed her writing style when it comes to some of the characters because she is sassy. Like, she makes the main character, Aru, incredibly sassy and sarcastic and like making jokes about stuff in her head, and I can't tell you how many times I laughed out loud while listening to this because it was great. And there's a character specifically, his name is Boo. I think he's supposed to be a pigeon, but I was straight up envisioning him as like the toucan from the Fruit Loops. So that's all I can see now. But he is basically a spirit or like a god, and I think he's just a spirit. He's like a celestial entity that is sent to basically be their guide and like their sidekick to help them on this grand adventure. And he is the sassiest person I have ever read about, or probably have and will ever meet, because he is so funny. And he is my favorite character. By far, he is my favorite character in this world, and I just love him. I just love him so much. I enjoyed this book, and I can't wait to read the rest in the series. The next book that I ended up reading was the 6th in the series Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket, The Ursat Elevator. This one was to fulfill the prompt of Baba Yaga's house, which is to read a book featuring a family relationship. This one was great. I was planning on reading this one physically, and then I needed to do a few things, so I found the audiobook on Scribd, and I said, sure, I'll just listen to the beginning of it so that I can get what I need to get done, and then I'll sit down and read it. The audiobook was by Tim Curry, and he was fantastic. Whoa. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I am invested in this world. There's a lot of things that I forgot about in this book specifically. There was a couple things that I did remember, but I forgot about, so it was really good going in, kind of knowing the, like, a vague plot line, but, like, not really remembering every little thing. So I was okay with that. But the people who are the guardians in this book might be the ones that annoyed me the most beyond Count Olaf himself. Oh my god. Because they're Esme and Jerome, and Esme is all about what is in, and orphans are in, so that's why she got orphans. Everything about her annoys me. And then Jerome doesn't like confrontation, so, like, he doesn't argue, he just lets the other person win, because he doesn't like to deal with that. How these two ever got married, I will never understand. But with that being said, it was quite a lot of fun. I do enjoy this series. One thing that I find actually fascinating now that I'm rereading this series is the first time I read this, I was the right age for this, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, Lemony Snicket needs to shut up. I hate the pages and pages of stuff that makes no sense. I just want to know about these orphans. So sometimes I would skip pages. Now that I've been reading it a second time, I'm realizing that all those pages of ramblings, as I used to think of them, are actually important to the plot, because he is, especially in the last few books, he's mentioning things that have to do with, like, things that the kids are learning about their parents. But, like, you just get an entirely different story when you're listening to Lemony Snicket as well. Like, the first few, it kind of is boring, because he's basically just telling you over and over, this is a terrible story, you shouldn't read it. But after that, he, like, every once in a while will drop a little something in, and you're like, wait a second, that actually sounds important, and I should remember that. And then it later turns out to be important. So I thought that was really fascinating, that, like, having read it a second time, I'm getting a totally different look at the story and realizing that, like, this guy's a genius and he's not just, like, rambling to ramble. These rambles have a purpose. The next book that I read is the one children's book that I ended up reading this month, which was James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl, and I did end up giving this one 4 stars. So this one was for the prompt of The Deep Woods, which was to read a book published before 2000, and this one was published in, like, 1961 sometime. But it was such a fun, like, fantastical adventure. The one thing that drove me crazy was it was my thing. It was nothing about this book. It was my own brain that I had to, like, redirect, because I kept thinking of things that, like, I had to keep reminding myself, this is a kid's book. It's okay that this thing doesn't make sense. It's not supposed to make sense right here. But then I would be the thing is, I would be upset about the wrong things. So, the fact that this peach grew, the fact that these insects are now the size of a little boy, that's fine. I could totally believe that. The fact that this entire group of people crossed over the Atlantic in one night, I said nope. That's where I draw the line, because that makes no sense. What is happening up here? All of it doesn't make sense, but that's where I was like, nah. It was good. I liked it. It was a fun kids book. I haven't read a kids book that's, like, made for kids in a while, so that was fun. The next one is one that I'm gonna have a hard time talking about, and that is Sabotaged by Margaret Patterson Haddix. This is the 3rd in the Missing series, and I'm saying I'm gonna have a hard time talking about this because of spoilers. This one I read for the prompt of Orion Found, which was to read a sci-fi book or a book related to space, and this is a sci-fi series. These are sci-fi elements within these pages, though they don't always feel like it. So I did end up giving this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed this book. I still think out of the 3 I've read so far, the 2nd is my favorite. This one I had a lot of, like, stress reading, because there was just a lot that happened in this book that I was stressed about. So, like, it does kind of, like, take you on this crazy adventure. But because there's such a big twist at the end of the first book that sets off the rest of the books, I can't really talk about a lot of stuff with this book, but it did fall in, and it was quite a lot of fun just to get swept up in this world. This one, out of the 3 that I've read, feels the most sci-fi, and I don't think that's because of, like, physically what's happening. I think it's because our main characters are thinking about a lot of different things, and those things that they're thinking about are sci-fi elements, and they're very aware of stuff that's happening, and they think about that kind of stuff more than they have in the first 2. I'm being the most vague thing I can possibly be. This is probably not great for you guys, but I enjoyed it. Main 2 characters are Jonah and his stepsister, or his adoptive sister, and another girl who drove me crazy. I hated her. I don't even know what her name is. Andrea. She was crazy. I hated her. She redeemed herself a little bit by the end, but my problem with her was she was so incredibly selfish, and, like, that's what her character is. That's where a lot of the plot comes from, is because she's selfish and decides to do things her own way, and it really messes up the entire, like, plot of the story. And I just wish that she had listened to our main characters, because, like, they know what they're talking about, and she's like, no, I'm going to do this because I want to, and I just really wanted to, like, Gibbs the back of her head from NCIS and just, like, pop it. Anyway, I don't even know what else to say about this. It was great. I cannot wait to read the next one. The next book that I ended up reading was The Quests for Glory, the 4th in the School for Good and Evil by Soman Chahnani. I read this one for the prompt of The Bookkeeper Stronghold, which was to read the next book in a series. I gave this one 5 stars. I loved this book so much. It was fan-freaking-tastic. So far, I think this one is my favorite, and I think it's because of Sophie. Sophie is such a flip-floppy character that you can't grasp who she is as a person in the first 3 until the end of the 3rd one, and now she's, like, set in stone. She knows who she is. She's, like, accepted the good and the bad about her, and I think because of that, we weren't focused on that anymore, and we were focused on a different plot line, and yeah, it's just better. It was just better. I also will say, this ending broke me, because he did this thing where he put you in a false sense of security, where you thought that you knew, that's a fly, you thought you knew what was going to happen. So, like, I was sure that there was this character that was going to end up being evil at the end. And then all of the things happen, there's a big, like, fight climax, and you're like, oh, perfect. So I was wrong. He's not actually going to flip-flop. And then in the last flat chapter, he flip-flopped on me, and I was so done. It was great. I mean, I enjoyed it because it, like, threw me off guard, and I was like, I'm sorry, what just happened? But he has this style, which is to wrap everything up in the last chapter, and you think it's good and dandy, and then, like, the last couple pages, he throws, like, a monkey wrench in the whole system, and goes, okay, this is it. Goodbye. See you in the next book. And you're like, no. Another thing that I really enjoy about these books, and that's not a this book thing, it's just, like, my experience with this book, is that all of the books I have read on, or listened to on Audible while I read along. And I'm going to continue to do that with the rest of the books in the series. But the narrator of these books, her name is Polly Lee, is phenomenal. It was so good. I don't even have the words to describe how amazing this was, because it was... yeah. I totally forgot to tell you the big thing about this. Okay. My biggest revelation, I guess you could say, with this is that this doesn't feel like middle grade anymore. It feels like we have now stepped into YA, because the main character, Tedros, or one of the main characters, Tedros, is 16, I think, at the beginning of this book, 16 or 17. He's not middle grade age anymore. He is now YA age. He is a teenager. He is going to run a country and get married. There's also a lot more cursing in this book, which I didn't realize in the first 3, but my husband did read the first one and told me that there was cursing in that one. So maybe I just didn't really notice until this book, but it just felt like it was very abrupt and in your face. But also, this book is violent. There is so much violence in this book, and there has been in the last 3. Like, I'm not saying that this is just like, it's all nice and peaceful and yay, and then this book is like in your face violence. It's like this one just seemed so much more than the next. So I just feel like the more you go through it, the older the writing gets, because the older the audience gets and the older the characters get. That's how I feel with this one. The first 3 are like, it just feels like he's like taken a step between 3 and 4 and has now bumped up because the age of the book people who are reading his books have bumped up. I don't know. I'm still considering this one a middle grade, but in my head it feels more YA to me personally. So, sorry if my angle changed. I had a video call that I had to do. But the next book that I ended up reading was The Lightning Thief, which is the first in the Percy Jackson and the Olympians by Rick Riordan. Oh, I'm so sorry about the glare. But this is one that I picked up from my library because my library was letting me pick up things again, and I decided to go back to the very beginning of the quest, and like I'd already been through it once, so I decided to go back again. So this one is also for Poachers Pocket which is really the first in a series, but this also fits for The Wonderfalls, which is a book featuring a disability, and I'm hesitant to say, but our main character does have dyslexia and ADHD, so I think dyslexia would be considered a disability, especially a reading disability. I'd be giving this one 4 stars. I loved this book so much. I really wanted to read this one because I'd always been interested in this series. I had watched the movies that came out that like nobody likes, but I had watched those. They were okay. And then the Olympic Games readathon that's taking place in June is all kind of based around this. Plus it has to do with Greek gods and demigods, and like that is my thing. So I decided to pick this one up and give it a shot, and it was fantastic. Everything about this was great. I really enjoyed my time. It flew by. I read this physically, and usually it takes me quite a while to get through physical books just because they take me a while to get through, but I flew through this one. I would sit down and read, and the next thing I knew it was like 2 hours later and I was like halfway done with the book. The titles of all the chapters make me giggle so much. They're so funny. Like literally the first one is I accidentally vaporized my pre-algebra teacher. We've got some that says I become the supreme lord of the bathroom. They're just really entertaining, and I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed all of the little aspects of Greek mythology that are placed in here, but I am excited to continue because this one was so much fun. one of the biggest things that I liked about this is that it's incredibly inventive and creative as to how it gets Greek gods and Greek mythology in a modern day setting and how they would react in modern day. Like, there's just a lot of things about this that I really appreciated and I love. And you don't know going into this who Percy's father is. I think it's pretty obvious. I feel like there's a lot of hints throughout this book that you can pick up relatively quickly as to who his dad is. So I think that, I mean, granted this is for middle grade, so like you want to make it simple enough for people, like younger kids, to pick up on, but I felt like it was really obvious who his dad was, and the fact that he wasn't picking up on the clues and nobody was picking up on the clues bothered me a little bit. So this was great. I very much enjoyed reading this and I can't wait to continue with the series. The next book that I picked up was Prince Caspian, which is the 4th in the Chronicles of Narnia series. So this one and the next book, I actually participated in the readathon as well, the 24-hour readathon by J.D. Ray Reads. This one fulfills the prompt of Yellow Brick Road, which is to read a book you meant to read years ago, because I've been meaning to read this for literal years. But I ended up giving this one 4 stars as well. It was fun. I enjoyed it. I personally think for enjoyment factor, the Disney movie of this one is better, just because there's not much to this plot and the books are really tiny. So the movie adaptations are like spot on as far as adaptions go, but there's something about this writing style that is the same as like J.R.R. Tolkien's writing style, in that you feel disconnect, like it's written in third person, but it's written in such a way that there's no urgency to what's going on, so you feel disconnected from the events and the plot that are happening on the page, and you feel like there's no danger for a character. So that's like not my favorite, but this is a classic fantasy, and that is kind of like a classic fantasy way to write, but I definitely enjoyed this one a lot. This was just a fun one to get through, and the audiobook narrator was like this little old British lady, is what she reminded me of, like a British grandma. Like that's what the vibes that I got from her were, and I very much enjoyed it. So that was a fun one to get through. The next one that I ended up reading, which I also read for the 24-hour readathon, was Wondersmith, The Calling of Morgan Crow by Jessica Townsend. I read this one for, ironically, the Brawley Rail, which was featuring transportation on the cover. There's tons of transportation in here because the Brawley Rail is in this book, but particularly on the cover, we have a car over here. I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed this book. I did listen to the audiobook of this, and I really liked the audiobook as well. But this is the second in the Nevermore series, and I read the first one when it was like super hyped and everyone was loving it and everyone was comparing it to Harry Potter, and then I read it and I didn't get any Harry Potter vibes from it, so I was really disappointed in it. I still enjoyed it. I think I still gave it 4 stars, but I was really disappointed in my experience with it. So I wanted to put enough time between that book and this one so that like the hype would wear down for this one. So I decided to pick this one up and give it a shot. I enjoyed this one so much more than the first one, and I think it's because I had that added pressure taken off of me. I was invested in what was going on. I felt for Morgan when she was going to, like, because this one kind of takes place where there's like a school aspect to it, but also you feel for Morgan when she's not accepted for a few things that happen at the end of the first book, and like I felt for her. I did have feelings. But I'm excited for the third one that's coming out this year. I love Jupiter even more than I did. He was my favorite character when I read the first book, and he's still my favorite character in this one. He's just ridiculously crazy. He reminds me of like a character that you would expect to find in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. Like that's what I get, except for that like everything he does makes sense and has a purpose. Even if you're not quite sure that you understand what it is, there's a reason for it. One thing about this book that I've heard a lot of other people say as well, and I didn't notice it until I read this one, is that Jessica Townsend has an incredible imagination, but also she can express it in a way that everything in this book, even all of the magical, fantastical elements, feel real and feel like they should exist today. Like you could definitely see walking into this school and seeing all the crazy stuff and all the crazy teachers, you could totally believe that that's a thing that's happening in front of your eyes. And I love that. I love that, like, she made you feel those things. What was that? Something else I noticed about this book that I didn't notice when I was reading the first book is her writing style is great. The thoughts and the snark and the sassiness that is in Morgan's head, I feel like I really got to see, and I loved it. Oh my gosh, it was so good. I have a lot of happy feelings when it comes to that one. And the last one that I ended up reading for the Believathon portion of the month was the third in the Earthsea Cycle series, which is The Farthest Shore by Ursula K Le Guin. This one was the June read for the Le Guin along, but because of the readathons that I'm doing in June, I didn't think I was going to have time, so I decided to read it. And this one could fit a ton of different things, but to complete like my second track through, I decided to use it for the Bookkeeper Stronghold again, as to read the next in the series. So this one, I'm not gonna have a lot to say on. I ended up giving this one 2 stars, which was such a disappointment because the second one was amazing and I loved it so much. It was narrated again by Rob Inglis, who I enjoy, but I don't know, there was just like, I'm still not quite sure what I read, and I don't know if it was because I was doing other things, so I kept like spacing out and coming back in, but I just didn't care about this book like at all. After like 30% of the way through, I was reading it to finish it because I wanted it to be over. So I'm curious to see what that live show is going to look like. Like, I don't even know what to say about it. It was just boring. Like, I was not intrigued by what was happening, which I've discovered is a thing with me and Ursula K Le Guin, is that the ideas and the plot of all of her books sound amazing, but the execution for me, it doesn't work, except for like the one time, because like the second book I liked. But like I don't think she's the writer for me. Will I continue with the fourth one? Yes, because it brings back the main character from the second one that I loved so much. So I'm intrigued to see where that part goes. But this one's all about like what happens when you lose your magic in a world where like magicians are a thing, and our main character is a magician. And it plays a lot with the idea of death. So there is some themes in there that I could pick up, because I talk a lot about coming to the end of the world and people who never die and are afraid to die. Also, the magic system is one that I haven't talked about yet, but it's really very odd, because it just seems like you need to know the real names of things, and then you're a magician. So like, why did you go to school? Just to like learn a bunch of names? Because like names have power in this world, which I would find interesting if certain names meant certain things, except for that, like, all you gotta do is know the person's name and then you're good to go, which is a little bizarre. This one also felt a lot like the first one, in that they spent so much time traveling that I just was like, I don't care about the boat and the traveling and the sea, and anyway, yeah. It was not for me. Gave it 2 stars. Okay, so now we get to the last 4 that I ended up picking up in the last little bit of the month. And the next one I'm going to talk about is the one that like I listened to on audiobook, or on Audible, because it was an Audible original that I got a while ago, so there's no like page number or anything. But that is Stephen Fry's Victorian Secrets. I gave this 5 stars. It was amazing. I don't want to talk about it too much because it's not technically a book, but I did listen to it, so I did want to mention it. It has the same feels as like a podcast, because he really goes in and takes you into different places in London, and you have actors that do different parts on top of that. I thought the production of it was phenomenal, because you were on the edge of your seats like the entire time. There are things that I have now learned about Victorian history. Like, this is all about secrets that like no one has talked about before. So this is an adult thing. So like, I know things now, but I enjoyed learning those things because they're so bizarre. And it takes you really deep into the history of Victorian England. It was really good, and I'm so glad that I finally listened to it. The next one that I ended up listening to was because I finished the Stephen Fry one when I was doing some stuff, and I needed another book to listen to. So I listened to Henry VIII and His 6 Wives by Janet Hardy Gould. gold, I believe. I'm not entirely sure what age range this is for. I consider it a middle grade, mostly because it's very, very short and it feels very young. Like, it feels like it's meant for young audiences. So basically the story follows Catherine Parr, which is the 6th wife of Henry VIII, and it was the wife that survived him when he died. She and her like maid find this box of letters, and there's a letter in there from every single of Henry's wives. And this nurse, or this maid, is from kind of a small town and doesn't really know a whole lot, and so it's the two of them. They go through this letters, and Catherine is telling her nurse, damn it, why do I want to call her a nurse? Catherine is telling this maid about all of the wives, how Henry got a second wife, a third wife, a fourth wife, like why this kept happening, and he kept getting new wives. And then they would read the letter, and it was very like, let me hold your hand and explain this to you, which is why I think it was for kids. I ended up giving this one 3 stars because it wasn't like the most amazing thing I've ever read. So I liked the idea of Catherine finding all these letters and like sharing her story with her maid. I feel like this would have been an amazing idea if it had been like a YA book and been stretched out. Anyway, I still enjoyed it a lot, and I am glad that I finally had time to listen to it. The next one that I picked up was ExLibris by Anne Federman. This is the Confessions of a Common Reader. This is a collection of essays. I believe there are like 10 in here. Actually, no. Oh, there are so many more than 10. I don't even know. But this was... So sorry. I gave this one 3.5 stars because I think a lot of the stories in here went over my head, and I think that I will enjoy this the more times I read it. There were some really great ones in here, but there were also some that like I didn't really care about. So for example, the first essay is about Anne and her husband after being married for like 5 years, finally taking their 2 libraries and making it one, and how their 2 styles of organizing books totally clash. And I thought that was fantastic. I liked, there's one about how, you know, whether or not you keep your books in pristine condition or whether or not you just kind of like read them because they're great. And so she just talks about like her life and experience, and I really did like her writing style because it's very conversational. It's very kind of like funny. She has a lot of humor in it. But then there were also stories about like grammar and how she is a proofreader, and grammar and I are like not biffles, so like those just went over my head. So I think that this is great, and I think that if you love reading, which I assume you do if you're here, then you will enjoy this, but you might not enjoy every single one in here. It just kind of like is who you are as a person. I'm glad that I did pick this one up, but I'd give it 3.5 stars. And like I said, I think upon further rereads in the future of certain sections, I will enjoy this more as we continue. And the very last book that I read this month was my other nonfiction, so I did get both of my nonfictions from my TBR jar in here, and that is the Plantagenets by Derek Wilson, The Kings That Made Britain. I gave this one 3 stars. This one it was very educational, but it's not quite what I expected. So some of the things that I did like about this book is that they are set up into sections. So every section is like a king. And so like they split it up like that, which I thought was really helpful because it's easy to get through, but it's also like shoves a lot of information in your face. And so I like that it is like chopped up into like little bite-sized pieces. But because it is early kings, and I realized that this is focused on the kings themselves, and it's focused on Britain as a whole, this book really focuses on the land that each king acquires and loses, and the military battles between each king, and a lot of the like struggle between England and Scotland, and England and France. So there's a lot of talk about military, and there's a lot of talk about the growth of land, and not as much talk about like maybe the home life in England. For example, like not every time, but there's a couple guys in here that you would get to the end of their section and they would have not mentioned once who that person married or if they had kids, and then the next section would be following their oldest son because that kid was now the king, and they like never mentioned that that guy even had a kid. So I did enjoy this. It just wasn't my favorite. I think I'm personally more interested in the home life of England and like what happens in the courts and like the things between families, and less about military and what happens to the land. This one was not quite what I was expecting, but I still am glad that I read it. But it did kind of drag a little bit just because he like throws a bunch of names and a bunch of information at you all at once and expects you to like comprehend it. So, can I even hold this up? It's gonna be a mess. Oh, okay. These are the not quite 16, but the 16 books that I did end up reading this month. I'm gonna put these here because I am gonna drop them. I had an amazing reading month as far as like quantity goes, and actually as far as quality, because I did have quite a few 4 stars this month. So that was really great. I'm so glad that I read some of these. I've had some of these on my, like for example, Fortune Hunter I've had on my list forever to read. I've always wanted to pick this one up. These two I've had for a while. So I got some reads done that I've been meaning to read for a while. So that was really good. But yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know down below what some of your favorites are that you read this month, or non-favorites if you want to talk about those as well. But if you did like this video, make sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you want to be part of this awesome growing family. As always, I have all my social media down there as well. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video.